Hello, Canada Files viewers. This is Aidan Jonah, editor-in-chief of the Canada Files. I am here for episode 30 of Canada and Palestine, the War on Zionism, with co-host Laith Marouf of Free Palestine TV. Thanks for being here, Laith, as always.
To be with you, Aidan, as always. Yes.
All right, Laith. So we have to talk about it. The obvious starter. Trump's talk about clearing out Gaza and this forced expelling of residents to, I believe, Egypt and Jordan. So, how can the Palestinian resistance respond to this brazen call for ethnic cleansing? And also, what did a certain kerfuffle around statistics reveal about the Israeli mass murder campaign, the genocide?
Yeah. So obviously, one thing that we need to note here is that he asked Jordan, he asked Egypt to take in the Palestinians from Gaza to ethnically cleanse basically the Palestinians from Gaza, expel them to these countries, and they refused. He also asked Indonesia, and they refused. And then he asked Albania, in Europe, which is the biggest puppet of the US in Europe, hosting all the terrorists in the region. From the MAK and the terrorists that attack Iran and so on. And they also refused. And the president of Albania posted on Twitter a very humiliating, basically, pushback against Trump. So that tells you that this is dead in the water. It's also something that Biden and the fascists and the Democrats also attempted at the beginning of the genocide. They had the same idea, and they also were rebuffed by Egypt and Jordan. So it is dead in the water. It's not going to happen. And the Palestinian people themselves in Gaza, with their mass march back to their homes all across the extermination camp the minute the ceasefire came into effect, shows you that this is not going to happen. It cannot happen, and that the Palestinians in Gaza would rather be genocided than leave and become eternal refugees again. We have to remember that much of the residents of Gaza, the Palestinians that are in Gaza, are actually refugees from what became the apartheid Zionist colony, refugees from villages and towns that are outside Gaza. Now, I think when you're talking about the statistics, you're referring to the number that Trump used as the number of Palestinians in Gaza that he wants to expel, 1.5 million, which gives us a clear indication, given that before the beginning of the genocide, there was the statistics saying that 2.3 million Palestinians reside inside the Gaza Strip. That means that we have lost at least 800,000 Palestinians in this genocide, whether it is through direct military actions of the Zionist colony and or starvation and medical neglect. So the size of the crime, the enormity of the genocide is now much clearer for everybody. It was probably a slip of the tongue by the emperor, but who knows, maybe he intended it on purpose to release this. But as we now see the images of people returning to their homes and finding decomposed bodies and skeletal remains of thousands of people under the rubble or in mass graves, the size of this crime will become clearer as the evidence mounts from the ground. And I think this is the in why the Israelis up until now are not allowing international media inside the Gaza Strip.
All right, Laith. Now, with the West Bank, because the second the ceasefire went down, well, the ceasefire did not touch upon the West Bank. So, how is Israel escalating the repression of the West Bank? And of course, it should be emphasized, how is the Palestinian Authority, the collaborator organization, assisting in this?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the minute the ceasefire came into effect in Gaza, the Zionists went onto a rampage in the West Bank, attacking Jenin and the Jenin refugee camp first, and then Tulkarem and the Tulkarem refugee camp, and now Nablus, and the military actions are ongoing in all of these towns and their refugee camps. And the Palestinian Authority is collaborating with the occupying force, either identifying the resistance and or even invading parts of the refugee camps and or capturing resistance fighters as they are escaping from the uh, conflict zones. So there was images of Palestinian youth that were fighters that escaped from the Jenin refugee camp that were captured by the Palestinian non-authority collaborationist security forces and beating up and humiliating them and making them eat dirt. This is all on video. And those videos were shared widely between the Palestinian people, and there was a lot of anger in the streets of the whole West Bank piling against the collaborationist regime of Mahmoud Abbas. And that led to direct confrontations and expulsions of the Palestinian authority, non-authority security forces in multiple towns and cities across the West Bank, as well as in the Tulkarem city, the two Palestinian youth made an ambush for the head of the Palestinian security forces in Tulkarem on a public road, rammed their car into his, and then pulled him out of the car. And there was cameras all around from the stationed cameras from different businesses on the street, and they whipped him badly and destroyed his car, and then they left him. They didn't execute him, but this in itself has, created a lot of ramifications within these security forces that are collaborating now. All the officers that are identifiable more than the actual individual soldiers, let's say, in this force that all put on masks when they're conducting their collaborationist activities. The officers are identifiable. Their names are out there. Their pictures are out there. They are now worried that their collaboration is going to come with a price. And if the first action, as we saw, of the Palestinian people was to whip this guy in the street in front of all the cameras to give an example of him, imagine what's going to be the next step if the collaboration continues. Now, having said all of this about the Palestinian non-authority, the Zionists are going on a rampage in Jenin camp, Tulkarem camp, Nablus camp, and they are using their air force. They are conducting mass destruction of the residential buildings and the public squares, and they're setting fire to civilian homes as they leave different neighborhoods. And there's now been a wave of refugees, internally displaced from Jenin and Jenin campus, reaching now over 6,000 families, whole neighborhoods that have been ethnically cleansed. And a few villages outside Nablus have been completely ethnically cleansed by the Israeli security forces. So we're already seeing, numbers that are reaching over 10,000 or around the 10,000 of internally displaced, and 10,000 not individuals, but families in those three cities and their refugee camps. And this is an indication of where things are going to go.
All right, Leif. Now, these releases of the Palestinians from Israeli dungeons, compared to the release of citizens of the Zionist entity from Palestinian. So, what is the striking nature of the difference between the treatment of the two?
You see, we saw those four Israeli female soldiers that were captured by the Palestinians during October 7th. These, by the way, these women were responsible for manning the automated machine guns and choosing who to kneecap during the Great March of Return. And anytime a Palestinian, gets close to the fence of the apartheid wall. So they are criminals. But the point is, they come out from imprisonment clearly in the best of health, clearly well fed, clean, in military fatigue. And we saw how the smiles they had in their face and the even stares that they gave to the Palestinian fighters that were standing on the stage, and the gifts they were given and how they were handed to the Red Cross and then delivered to their home. And we heard from them, of course, that there was no abuse that they have suffered throughout this time. And in comparison, we saw the exit of these Palestinian prisoners that have been held for decades, some of them 45 years, coming out with visible signs of torture, abuse, and medical neglect and malnutrition. And FBTV documented the all of these abuses in one of our videos, and we are interviewing as many as possible of the ex-Palestinian prisoners as they come out over the last two waves, and we're going to cover more of them. But the point here is look at the difference between the treatment of both. And I want to say, we heard some Zionist media say, well, it's Stockholm syndrome that up until now, not one Israeli prisoner that came out of imprisonment in Gaza claimed abuse, and that this is Stockholm syndrome that they speak in good terms about their captives. Well, we haven't heard one Palestinian ever in their whole life, in the whole 80 years of struggle, not only this last wave, we haven't heard one Palestinian ex-prisoner relate to their captures, right? We never heard one good word from a Palestinian that came out of Israeli prison. So why is it that Palestinians don't have Stockholm syndrome even after being decades in the dungeons of Israel? So shows you how it is this idea of Stockholm syndrome is actually unsound psychologically, right? In general, it's just fabricated diagnosis. Okay, and for somehow it always relates only to white people. You never hear an African, a Latin American, an indigenous people come out of jails of the West identifying with their captures, right? Or being enslaved by somebody and identifying with their slave master. That doesn't happen. It's not in existence. And yes, again, these are all clear, in clear dichotomy, these two realities of the indigenous people, how they treat the prisoners of their enemy, and that of the colonizer who hates people for who they are.
All right, Leif. So this ceasefire between Hezbollah and the Zionist entity, the entity never respected this in the first place, in the slightest, at all. However, it has technically ended. So this situation for Lebanese citizens, Lebanese resistance as a whole, how do you see the situation evolving? And I'm going to mention the fact that I've seen videos of Lebanese citizens returning to territory, scaring off Zionist soldiers. I think you have most definitely seen the clips. And if I remember correctly, you even went to one of the towns to record live. Am I correct there?
So we went for 3 days visiting most of the villages that got liberated by the population, and we were there on the ground the minute the ceasefire ended and the the Lebanese civilians decided to march back to their towns and villages and push the Israelis out with their flesh. So we walked with the villagers as they entered their villages and documented for 3 days. This process is still ongoing right now. And of course, you are right. The Israelis and people, by the way, can watch on Free Palestine that video. We just released the first of two documentaries that we did over the last 3 days. And you can see in your own eyes the process. But you are right, the ceasefire never existed for the Israelis. They have violated the ceasefire over 1,300 something times in the last 2 months. And the ceasefire entailed the withdrawal of Hezbollah's military forces behind the Litani River within these 60 days, and at the same time, the withdrawal of the Israelis back to the international recognized border, and the deployment of the military, Lebanese military, and the UNIFIL in the regions south of the Litani. Now, Hezbollah delivered on its obligations. The Israelis refused to deliver on their obligations. In fact, they occupied all these Palestinian Lebanese villages in the south that now are being liberated by the population during the ceasefire. Before the ceasefire, the Israelis did not occupy one single Lebanese village completely. And so now they went on a rampage after the ceasefire, destroying all these villages, the homes, the infrastructure, the civilian, the churches, the mosques, the hospital, everything. And so the Lebanese people from the south actually implemented the ceasefire by going in and walking to their villages. The Lebanese military in the beginning blocked their way so they don't take their cars. We saw arguments happening, and the people just walked, stopped their cars, went into their villages with motorcycles or on foot. And in the beginning, the Israelis were shooting on people. There was on the first day 20 somewhat people that were, I think 18 actually, 18 people that were martyred, 100 something that were injured. But this pressure of the flood of civilians forced the Israeli military to withdraw from almost all the villages, save the ones that are in the eastern corner of the border, in the shadows of the Golan Heights of Syria that are occupied. So where, the Lebanese people were able to force also the Lebanese army, who in some instances ended up actually moving in with them into these villages or in front of them in what seemed to be kind of a mutiny, or little mutinies here and there of soldiers that didn't want to comply with the collaborationist decisions of the head of the military that was refusing to allow them to engage the Israelis.
So I'm thinking about the case of Ali Abu Nima. Now, luckily, now he is, of course, the executive director of Electronic Intifada and a fantastic journalist. Now, he was unjustly detained by Swiss authorities. So, what grounds did they even try to claim to justify this detention? And what is Switzerland's role in enabling Israel's genocide? Now, one thing people should know, Abu Nima was going to go to a speaking engagement in Switzerland. That's part of the reason why they detained him.
Yes, so he was invited to speak in multiple events, as far as I know, in Switzerland, and he was detained briefly in the airport and then let go with no explanation given. So he was allowed into Switzerland, and then three, uh, you know, security officers in plain clothes abducted him off the street and threw him into an unidentified car with no plates or anything, and hold off, like a kidnapping, literally. And here's a public figure that they know where he's staying, they know what he's doing, and could easily be just arrested in a, you know, more logical way with otherwise everybody that was on the street must have thought that this is a true kidnapping. This is how it, and so the intention of the actions from the beginning of it, and we can discuss a little bit more about what happened next, but the intention of these actions all are intimidation. This is the mafia, the Zionist mafia, the Zionist pirates, bandits that are trying to use the same tactics they use against the Palestinians inside the Zionist colony. They're trying to now normalize that fully in the, Zionist empire domains, whether it's in Europe or North America and what have you. So, um, you know, intimidation, trying to break the will of the people and those who resist, and to make examples of such a big name as Ali Abu Ni'mah, a friend of mine that I've known for decades and toured him in Canada dozens of times. So, and then obviously they originally claimed to the public, or the head of the police force in Zurich, uh, in his public statement, said that Ali Abu Ni'mah calls for violence in Switzerland and is anti-Semitic or hates Jews. And then in the end, he was held for 2 days, questioned multiple times, one of them without his lawyer, and no charges were laid and no accusations were put forward.
Now, Richard Medhurst, I saw a post from him recently saying I think it was the some sort of UK police branch that they want to extend the time for the investigation on him around the supposed violations of terrorism laws. Is that correct?
Yes, so we're seeing the use of these, laws and or just the use of force by the state, in this case of Ali Abu Ni'mah, to intimidate and curtail the movement and activities of the most outspoken critics of the Zionist colony within the imperialist Zionist domains. And so, because they've lost the argument, they are unable to silence the truth anymore. It's too obvious. And they're beginning now to try to forcefully and with violence, state violence, shut down anyone who is big names, to make an example of them so others don't follow suit in being so bold in their positions against Zionism and genocide.
Now, Laith, CBC, you've had many a run-in with them. That's the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation for any international folks watching this. An anchor from there, Natasha Fatah. Basically, Faisal Kuti put this up, so I saw it, I noticed it. There's this grieving Palestinian. They were told they couldn't use the word genocide to describe Israel's genocide against Palestine. They were outright shamed by this host, Fatah. So Fatah now has an interesting family and an interesting father. So this whole story, can you unpack it for the audience?
Well, Natasha Fatah is one of the what we'd call brown faces, one of the good kitchen slaves, house slaves, coconuts that the CBC hires to perpetuate white supremacy, Jewish white supremacy, Zionism, colonialism, with their brown face. This is her job. She knows why Master allowed her to be an anchor. That's all it is. Probably Natasha will do anything that I ask her to do if I have enough money to put her in front of a camera and pay her. It's a prostitute, okay? That's what they call them, right? But she is also a coconut prostitute, a house slave prostitute, uh, a brown face prostitute, okay? And so it's not surprising that she would be so bold. She did what a Jewish Zionist host on CBC wouldn't have dared to do. She is put there to flog, whip any uppity brown people that get on CBC. You see? This is her job. And of course, she should be ashamed within the community. She should be, every time she comes out in a public space in Canada, members of the Arabic and Muslim and Palestinian communities and those of decent Canadians should make her public life uh, miserable as she can if she wants to continue get money humiliating her community behind closed doors for white master and on air. Well, she shouldn't be allowed to have that ability in real life, in public life. So Natasha, Fatah, and the other house slaves, whether they're Asia, South Asian, East Asian, African, Latino, that are playing this game on behalf of the Canadian colonial genocidal government and its propaganda mouthpiece also should have the same treatment in public spaces as Natasha Fatah should have.
All right, like now I'm thinking about a protest that occurred at the event of a Zionist conservative MP, Melissa Lantsman. I just want to mention it quickly, very quickly. It was led by Hamilton Coalition to stop the war. So there are still some protests going on in Canada, but the movements have really slowed down. I mean, I don't think you would really have that much of a different impression than me Lath. But the more eye-catching thing was, with Liberal MP Chrystia Freeland. She's very much a Zionist, and she was supported by rabid Zionist Liberal MP Anthony Housefather. So her launch was repeatedly disrupted by Palestine Solidarity protesters. They said she's refused to meet with community members, discuss their frustration with Canada's support for Israel's genocide. There's a bit of a problem, though, in the phrasing, and it kind of caught my eye from the purchaser side. They talk about cutting diplomatic relations with Israel until Israel's human rights violations are fully addressed, rather than a step before continuing demanding, the end of the Zionist entity. It's still like this liberal thinking is this two-state solution thinking, even in the most brave of Palestine solidarity protesters in the country. Still, Israel's existence is a conditional rather than a non-possible, non-negotiable, like a must. It can't exist, right? So it's just, what do you think about this
Yeah.
action, Laith?
Yeah, I don't call these actions brave. Um, Honestly, this is the minimum that could be done, and has been done over and over and over for 20 years, if not longer, and clearly has zero repercussions. And the establishment knows there's zero repercussions. That's why they don't beat them up like they do in the US or something if something like this happened. And the media just rolls it off their back, the mainstream media. So these actions are in the long term irrelevant. Okay. So, and in the terms of Landsman, this is an outright Jewish white supremacist. Of course, you remember the photo of her standing with those militia that they created in Toronto to quote unquote protect Jewish areas. She's standing with that symbol that the white supremacists do with their hands. that the son of Trump did also during the inauguration. You see, this person is a Jewish white supremacist, avowedly and openly. Okay, and she's this person it represents that in the Conservative Party. Freeland is a granddaughter of a Nazi, one of the leaders of the Nazi Ukrainians that were involved in the genocide against the Jewish people. But she's also an avowed Zionist, and she was the deputy prime minister or co-prime minister, whatever her position was, that stupid position that never existed before, that was created for her, as she was supporting the genocide in Gaza. She was also supporting the war in Ukraine, supporting Nazis and Zionists. This is the reality now. Zionism and Nazism have evolved into oneness, and these two individuals represent those realities. And the Canadian public has no other choices. You have the NDP. We saw what the NDP has been doing to Sarah Jama just now, refusing to allow her to run for the NDP and putting a name of another brown house slave to compete against her, who's not even from the city of Hamilton where Sarah Jama resides. I don't remember the name of this new candidate that the NDP is pushing, coming from Guelph, where she lost multiple times those in elections. But you see, the NDP is also a Zionist, colonialist, genocidal party. So what is left? The Greens, again, Zionist. The Bloc Québécois, okay, they're French white supremacist Zionists. They're not Anglo white supremacist Zionists. That's their difference. So what does the Canadian public have as choices if they do not want to participate in genocide in Gaza, in Palestine in general, and want their country to cease to be a colonial genocidal regime? Does running banners behind politicians going to make a difference?
Most certainly is not. All right, Laith. Well, I think that's a good place to leave this episode. So, to the audience, thank you very much for making it to the end of the episode. To Laith, thank you very much for co-hosting this episode.
Good to be with you, Aidan.
And to the Canada Files audience, if you want to support the journalism analysis done by both the Canada Files and Free Palestine TV, please do set up a monthly, annual, or one-time donation. If that is not possible for you financially, please do share the work around. Goodbye to all of you. See you next week.